Hello everybody, and welcome to my advanced flipping guide for 2020. Now throughout the years I've made quite a few guides on beginner level flipping, but today I wanted to tackle intermediate to advanced level stuff. Now if you don't know too much about flipping in Oldschool Runescape, I will leave a link to my beginner level guide that will be in the description. I would recommend watching that quickly first before you watch this video. Now today I'm going to be covering quite a bit about strategy, mindset, and of course also I'll be going in depth into flipping techniques that I use, and pretty well anything I think will be useful to someone who already knows the basics to flipping. I hope you guys find it useful. As always, if you do, I really appreciate it if you leave the video a like. It really does help my video get recommended to others. Anyway guys, let's get started. Now the first thing I want to talk about today is probably the easiest and most basic part of this guide. I know it's an advanced guide, but you know what? Some basic things definitely need to be hammered down more than once. Everybody should do this, and not just merchants or flippers who have a lot of money. So the first rule of my advanced flipping guide, secure your account. I know people are complaining constantly about how bad the security is for Jagex, but in my opinion, the majority of issues can be prevented just by employing a basic level of account security. First up, make sure you have a bank PIN. That's really easy. Next, make sure you have two-factor authentication enabled for your RuneScape account, as well as the email that you use to create it. Make sure you pick a strong password, one that you don't use anywhere else. And finally here, when you log off from your account, make sure your money is either in your bank or in a grand exchange offer slot. If you have it in your inventory, your PIN is pretty much useless, so don't do that. So there you go, account secured, now we can move forward. Now next up here, I find it really useful to set yourself certain rules to follow while you are flipping. Now these aren't maybe so much rules, more so guidelines. These rules can be bent, sometimes they can be broken, but I think they're in general useful to have. In my opinion, it kind of takes away the edge of the decision-making process. It helps reduce stress and the emotions that come with making big financial decisions, and ones that can end up losing you money sometimes. Now these are rules that I usually follow, although sometimes, like I said, I do break them. Now the first rule is pretty easy, and that is not to invest all of your eggs into one basket. In more specific terms, don't invest all of your money into one grand exchange offer. So if you only have 100 mil, don't invest all of that into a Dragon Enter crossbow, and there's a couple reasons why. Now the rule that I generally follow is to never invest more than 1/10 of your total capital into a single flip. So for example, if you have 100 mil, don't invest more than 10 mil per offer slot. I find that this really does help you diversify your items, which will lower your risk as well as optimize your returns. Now obviously it's going to be lowering your risk because you're not invested all into a singular item. This is usually sound advice for real economies as well as the RuneScape economy. For example, if you invest all of your money into a Dragon Enter lance, and all of a sudden Jagex decides to nerf it, you're going to lose a lot of money as well as not have any diversification into other items. Now keeping each of your individual investments to around 10% also helps optimize your returns. Now it does this because generally your return on your investment, or your ROI, tends to get lower as items get more expensive. So for example, if you have 100 million coins again, it's generally much more efficient to invest 10 mil into 10 separate items than 100 mil into a single item. For example, the Dragon Enter lance, if you invest all of your money into there, generally you'll get probably a 150k to a 200k margin if you're lucky. But for a comparison, if you invested into a bunch of items that cost 10 million GP, you could probably get a 50k or more return on each one of those, which altogether will earn you around 500k to maybe a mil in profit, which in the end is going to be a lot more money. Now one other guideline that I set myself is to never have cash sitting idly around doing nothing. Don't keep money on the sideline that has no purpose. Now that's not to say that you should liquidate everything you're not using at every point and invest it into flipping, but of the money that you have allocated to flipping, make sure you try to maximize the usage of it at all times. Money that is sitting in your bank or your inventory is not doing anything. Now another thing that I definitely do, at least at a subconscious level, is to set myself goals for returns. For every flip that I do, I am definitely looking for a certain threshold of a return on my investment. Now to give a concrete number here is kind of hard because this will vary a lot based on your own personal taste, how big your total cash stack is, and what type of items you're doing. Now these are just general rules of thumb. You can definitely change these based on your own personal preference, Now I have broken this into two separate sections. We have high margin items, which are going to be your rare, expensive items. Now in general, as I mentioned earlier, as item prices go up, your overall return on investment is going to be going down. For example, a pretty decent return on an item that would cost you 100k might be a 5% return on investment. It sounds good for sure, but that's only 5,000 GP, so it's not that much money. On an item that costs around 1 million coins, I would be looking for maybe a 3% return on investment or more. That's around 30k GP or more. On an item that costs around 5 mil, I might be looking for a 1.5% return, which is around 75k. On an item that costs around 10 mil, I'm looking for maybe a 1% return, or around a 100k margin. Now as you get into the really expensive items, it really starts to go down a lot. For an item that costs 100 mil, I might be looking for maybe a 0.3% return, so drastically less. Now for high volume items, the return on investment is not as important. Just to illustrate this, for example, the feather has right now a 50% ROI. That obviously sounds really good, but it doesn't mean it's really a good flip because that's only a 1 GP profit, so you can see why that's not the perfect metric all the time. So for high volume items, I would generally be looking more at the actual GP return, but if I were to give an actual number for return on investment, I would say somewhere between 2 and 5% is a pretty good item. Alright, so I think that's enough rules, regulations, guidelines, whatnot. Let's just jump into some real flipping here. So I'm going to go through step by step my thought process when I am selecting items, how I check the margins, how I determine when to sell, and just the whole process. Now for example here we have 100 mil. Now 100 mil is a pretty decent chunk of change to be flipping with, and you can do it with way less, and people obviously do it with way more. Now to employ one of the first rules I mentioned earlier, we only want to invest somewhere around 10 mil into an offer slot. Now does that mean I'm going to be picking a 10 million GP item? Well no. Now to flip something effectively, you definitely need to do it more than once, and if I only invest into a single item per offer slot, I'm not really going to come out ahead. Just for example, with the torture, I'm going to show you why this doesn't really work. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and price check the torture, instantly buy it, instantly sell it. Now to get our money back here, we definitely need to flip it at least one more time. Ideally though, you'd want to do the entire buy-in limit, which would be 7, and all of a sudden look, our entire investment is into one slot pretty well. Not very efficient. So realistically, we're looking for an investment per offer slot that would total roughly 10 mil. Now as you can see, item selection is one of the most important parts of flipping. Pretty much any item can be flipped, but obviously some are going to be much better than others. Now it's really important to know the characteristics behind the item that you are flipping and knowing the kind of type of flip you're doing. Now to determine the type of item that you are flipping, I look at 3 major data points, that being the buy-in limit, the daily volume, and the price. Well, the price is pretty easy, it's displayed right in the GE. The buy-in limit will also be displayed here if you have RuneLite, which I would highly recommend because there's really useful plugins for flipping on RuneLite. Definitely gives you a bit of an advantage. And the final data point is daily volume. Now daily volume is most accurately displayed on the official RuneScape Marketplace website. For example here, we can see on average the daily volume is around 3,000. Now based on this information, we can determine that the Arim's robe skirt is a very quick, high margin flip. I would categorize it as a high margin flip because it has a high price tag, a low buy-in limit relatively, but also a relatively high volume for a piece of PVM gear. Now this is something that you will kind of just innately know after a while, but when you're just kind of learning more advanced flipping techniques, it's good to go through the process. So 3,000 traded a day doesn't really mean too much, so let's divide that by 24 to give a rough estimate of how many are traded per hour. Now per hour we have around 125 traded. Now for our purposes, we only need to do 15 of those, so it's pretty likely that we'll be able to do all of those within half an hour or less. After that, we're going to simply do a price check. Okay, so 1339 into 1335. Okay, so that looks pretty low to me, I probably wouldn't do it, but let's calculate the return on investment anyway. Now the return on investment is generally displayed as a percentage. And to get that number, you're going to take your margin, which is your sell price minus your buy price. Take that number, which in this case is 4,000, and divide it by your buy price, which in this case is 1,335,000, which in this case is only a 0.3% return, which if we refer back to our general guidelines is way under, so let's find a new item. Now, there are quite a few different ways to find items. One of my favorites obviously is GE Tracker. They are a sponsor of mine. I use them pretty much every day when I'm flipping. If you do want to check them out, there will be a link in the description. It does help the channel out. I do get a referral bonus for you guys signing up through the link. But with that said though, GE Tracker is not by any means required. As I mentioned earlier, pretty much any item can be flipped, so really what you just need to find is there some way to find some inspiration for items to flip? Now if you just come here to the official RuneScape marketplace, I will hopefully leave a link in the description for that. You can come over here to maybe the top 100 most valuable trades. Scroll down, there's just a bunch of different items here. A lot of pretty good high margin items. If you're looking for high volume items, you can go to most traded. These are the most traded items over the last 6 months. A lot of good items here. Another good option is just to go into your bank and have a look at what you have there. Really anything can work, you just kind of need to try it. Okay, so moving on here, let's try another item, the Malediction Ward. Again, we're just going to instantly price check it. We're not going to wait around all day. So 1767 into 1800, that's looking a lot better. Okay, so we know the price is just under 2000, which is roughly within our price range. The buying limit is 8, so most likely it's a high margin item. And finally here, we'll hop over here onto the RuneScape marketplace. We can see that there's around 500 to 800 traded per day, so a bit lower than the last item. So 800 a day is around 30 per hour, which means in an hour you might be able to do 8 of them. Keep in mind though, you need to pretty much buy 8 of them and then sell 8 of them. So that's actually 16 transactions. Finally here, let's have a look at the return on investment. So we're gonna take 1.8 mil divided by our buy price. That will give us a margin of 33,000. We're gonna take that and divide it by our buy price. Take that number, multiply it by 100, and we have a return on investment of 1.8%. I would say that is pretty reasonable, so let's go ahead and buy this item. So we're gonna go ahead and buy it for around this price. Now, no shame here, we're gonna increase it by a couple GP. Honestly, in a perfect world, nobody would have to undercut, but we don't live in that world. There's an extremely small chance that anybody else will give you that courtesy. We're gonna bump this up to, I guess, around 6 quantity. That gives us about a 10.6 mil investment. And there we go, we got a flip in there. Okay, so it looks like for the Malediction Ward, we have now bought 4 of them. That took pretty well 15 minutes for 4 of them to come through. Now, when there's a higher quantity of a certain item traded per hour, the price tends to change a lot. More trades per hour means more people involved in the item, more chances for people to undercut you, or just the price to change in general. So that pretty much means that the longer you wait, the higher chance you have of your margin being completely different. That is just the reality of flipping, and that's why it's really important to know the buying limit, the price, and the volume of your item. So for this item, the Malediction Ward, if I was waiting here for more than 20 minutes, I would probably change it up. If, for example, I was flipping a 3rd age pickaxe, well, half an hour probably would not be nearly enough time. If I was flipping Zulrah scales though, and it's been longer than 5 minutes, I probably would go recheck the offer or change it up. Okay, so it's been about 20 minutes. I'm assuming that the buy price could have changed a bit. So we're gonna go ahead and buy another one. We're not going to sell it though. We're just gonna recheck the buy price and it's 1826. That's actually pretty good that we did that because we're getting now an extra 26K margin on that. So we're gonna take our 6 items and we're gonna sell them off for 1826. And we're gonna call that a day. We'll take our other offer here just to keep things a little clean. And now we just pretty much gotta wait longer. Alright guys, we are done. So as predicted, that flip actually took pretty much half an hour. And we managed to flip 6 of them, but kind of not really. Keep in mind the very first and last one was actually a price check, which means realistically we profited on 4 of them, but it was definitely worth taking the extra time to check because our margin grew by a significant amount, up to 59K in profit per Malediction Ward. So we'll go ahead and claim that, and that means we've actually profited already 250K, not bad. And keep in mind that was only in 1 offer slot. If we repeated that 8 times, for example, that's 2 mil in profit. Let's do one more example here. We're gonna try the Dragon Plate Body. Actually, one of my favorite items. It has a buying limit of 70, which is on the higher end. It has a high price though, so it is definitely a high margin item. Right now it has a margin of around 40K, which is really good. So we're gonna take our margin, which is 39, divide that by 24.45, and then multiply that by 100, which is gonna give us a ROI of 1.6%, which is reasonably pretty good. Once again, let's put in some money here. We're gonna go ahead and do, we'll go for 6 of them. Now, as for the volume, I already checked here. It looks like around 600, 700 per day, which is pretty similar to the Malediction Ward, which means in half an hour, we could probably flip upwards of maybe 10, maybe even 15 of them. Now, in general, I would be doing a bunch of different offers at once, but for learning purposes, I think it's going to be less confusing if we just focus on a single item at a time. Okay, so when you do your flip, usually one of two things will happen. Either it will go through perfectly, you'll be uninterrupted until you hit your buy-in limit, but the more likely scenario, and what happens at least 50% of the time to me, is you'll get partway through your flip and then all of a sudden, everything stops. Either you stop buying them or you stop selling them, or in this case, both. Now I bought 3 Dragonplate bodies within around 5 or 10 minutes. After that though, we haven't bought a single one for the next 15 to 20. That's a really good indicator that the price has changed. Most likely somebody undercut you. So now moving forward, you have 3 options. Option 1 is you're just patient, you just wait it out, which actually isn't a bad option if you have time to spare. Option 2 is you recheck the margin again, which can work, although if you have to end up doing this a bunch of times, you end up not really making any money in the flip. Option number 3 is you just guess. Now I'm kind of a fan of that option. What I usually do is if an item has stopped, I will take the buy price, for example. So right now we're buying it for $24.45. Let's bump it up to $24.49. Kind of an arbitrary number, but whatever. We'll take our sale here though, but same thing for the sell price. We'll drop it by 2,000 or 3,000 GP. That's why it's really important to know the volume of your item. That way you can really determine whether someone has undercut you without actually having to do a margin check. We'll leave that for another 10 minutes and see what happens. Okay, so there we go. We changed the margin very slightly and all of a sudden, a lot of sales coming through. We ended up buying another 3 and selling off another 3. Sure, the margin is a bit less, but in the end, we made money much quicker. Let's claim all these offers here and see where we're at. Now, after just doing 2 different items, we're up to 381K in profit. Okay, so that is where I'm going to end it for today, guys. The plan is to make a series of video guides, all adding on to the beginner flipping guide I released back at the beginning of 2020. If you are interested in that, I'm going to be adding them into a playlist. In the end, I might have 4 or 5 videos in there, which at that point should have something for everyone. Anyway, guys, I really hope you enjoyed the video. And of course, if you have any questions, leave them down below. Anyway, guys, before I go here, I want to give a massive thank you to one of my newest members over on YouTube. ZIYL, thank you so much for subscribing at the Dragon tier. That is really awesome. Really appreciate it. They're joining James Luft, BradSings, RevolverOcilot, and Kush Patel, who all subscribed at the Dragon tier. You guys are crazy. And also a big thank you to Basstich, who is subscribed at the Runite tier. If you guys are looking for another way to support the channel, becoming a YouTube member is an awesome way to do so. In return, you can get immortalized in some of my videos, get a custom YouTube member role in my Discord, as well as access to other perks. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.